I'm really happy to be introducing today everybody that's going to be talking about big objects and async SOQL. So my name is Arabella, and I'm the Senior Director of Developer Marketing here at Salesforce. And I'm very happy to have calling in today Mike Salem, who's Principal Solution Engineer here at Salesforce, Yadi Salama, who's Director of Product Management here, and Ryan Shellack, who's the Product Marketing Manager. So welcome to you all, and we'll get started in a second, but this wouldn't be the proper Salesforce presentation if we didn't have the forward-looking statements. So do bear in mind that there might be statements in this presentation that are forward-looking. So if you are looking to purchase any solutions, do make your purchasing decisions based on what's currently available. All right. So with that said, we'll dive in, and I'd like to hand over to Ryan Shellack, who will get us started here today.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Arabella, for the introduction. And thanks to all of you who have joined us today, wherever you are, to learn more about big objects and how developers can leverage them to build amazing experiences natively on Salesforce. Here's a brief rundown of our agenda. We're going to start off by talking a little bit about what are big objects. So if you've never heard of them before, you just took a sort of passing curiosity into them, we'll explain what they are. And then we're going to go into a demo of how to actually create and load up a big object with data from Salesforce and outside of Salesforce using clicks or code. Then we're going to look into some of the key use cases and design patterns for big objects with our Director of Product Management, Yari. And then finally, we'll do another demo around using Async SOQL, our powerful compute and query engine, to actually manipulate big data to service you and your customers. After that, we'll talk a little bit about where you can learn more and what's coming in the future for big objects, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. And I'll start off really with a context that I think many of us have for discussing situations where we need to leverage data to create experiences that are compelling and immersive for our customers, for our partners, for our employees. And that's really the fact that today every customer is connected. I recently stayed at a Marriott and was able to check in, order room service, check out, even have my room cleaned, all from my mobile app. I never had to really interact with the front desk. And that experience involved a lot of data, as do many connected experiences that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. And the challenge with data is that we're moving more and more data progressively to the cloud than we ever have before. Pretty much everything that you can think of, data around our location, who we are, how we live, our health, our financial status, all that information has massive amounts of data behind it. And the challenge to businesses is if you're going to build a creative experience and an immersive experience, you need to capture and leverage this data and take advantage of the fact that this data needs to be centralized to be properly utilized for applications and services. That's been the challenge that we've had to deal with, and traditional storage modes haven't always lived up to that challenge. But you need to capitalize on this explosion of data to actually take advantage of what this data can mean for the services that you need to create. And so if you've built before in Salesforce and you've created applications, you know that there's powerful systems for engaging customers and engaging partners, systems that are prepackaged and systems that you can create through our app development platform, the Lightning platform, and through corollary systems like Heroku. The challenge, of course, though, is if you need to scale to massive data sets, potentially data sets that are in the billions of records or the tens of billions of records, you're usually going to run into some constraints. Sometimes these are financial restraints, sometimes these are technical restraints. And so the challenge has been, regardless of where you are, if it's on Salesforce, if it's on a third-party system, you need to create and manage your own big data stack. This will include how to actually structure and engineer your data, how to actually package the data and distribute it on some type of distributed SQL or non-SQL based database, how to then effectively query it at scale, taking advantage of the fact that as you actually bring more data in, it becomes even harder to create modes of querying effectively and quickly. And we've realized that problem at Salesforce, and we thought, how can we better improve the developer experience for wrangling and leveraging massive data sets without making it a separate project that the developer needs to undertake and skills that they need to enhance. And the end solution that we've arrived at is this concept of a big object. And so if you've been paying attention over the past year or so, you might have heard that we GA'd big objects around Dreamforce last year. And what we did was we created a separate mode of storage for big data scale natively on the Lightning platform. we were able to create a completely different data model and approach to data engineering that allows you to incorporate potentially billions of records into your applications, into the experiences that you're developing for your customers or for the services that you're going to build and distribute. And we're able to do this without you ever having to pick up and learn separate big data technologies or integrate a third-party big data stack. Instead, any platform developer, so anyone on the line, anyone that's ever used SOQL, anyone that's used Apex or the metadata API, all of these tools that you're already familiar with can be incorporated to create an experience that is actually scaled out to billions of records, but that looks and feels like a native Salesforce experience. We wanted to do this so that when you think of things like design constraints and performance constraints, it's something that we take care of for you so that you can spend less time living in the operational side of big data management and more towards the application side of leveraging data to create better experiences for anyone or any project that you have on your plate. What we really want to provide is a mode of ingesting data at scale wherever your data needs to live, and being able to circulate all the data from all of your systems and then centralize it within your Salesforce platform. So that if you need to create something in the Lightning platform, you can inform that application or that experience or that flow with the data that you need from all of your different systems. Those can be cloud-based systems, those can be legacy systems, and of course that can be all of your CRM or non-CRM data. And the great thing too is that we have many different modes for collecting this data and bringing it into the Salesforce platform. And this can range from point-and-click tools like dataloader.io from our actually no longer our partners, actually our friends at MuleSoft who are now part of our Ohana, all the way to more advanced tools like the MuleSoft Anypoint platform or the Salesforce APIs, most specifically the Bulk API. And then of course this can be any other kind of third-party ETL solution for moving massive amounts of data into Salesforce. But rather than dropping that into a standard or custom object, we can bring that into a big object and then use that data within the big object for anything else that we need to build within Salesforce. So that if you need to bring in hundreds of millions of records from a product book that is no longer in service but is important to many of your legacy customers, you can do that and you don't need to compromise on the fact that this is considered cold storage. Instead, you can have a platform and build services that incorporate both your cold storage, the data that you need to archive for long amounts of time but rarely utilize, and that's largely immutable, and then your hot storage, data that's going to be completely active, that's being changed and queried all the time, and that you need to frequently update. So we want to look at this in a bit here, but before we do that, I want to talk about how you create big objects because that has changed if you haven't really dealt with us in a while. And the exciting thing is that we're able now to provide a completely declarative and streamlined interface for creating big objects. This setup flow was actually created by my dear colleague and the person I'm going to introduce soon, Mike Salem and his team. And what we're able to do is create a big objects experience that is friendly to any developer, and especially those who don't really have big data experience. You don't need to spend as much time focusing on how to create an index with the metadata API. You of course can, and many of our customers do. But if you want to get started with big objects today, and you should, because every customer and every edition of Salesforce comes with 1 million rows of big objects included, you can actually take this component, the link for which I actually have on the slide here, and begin to create and populate a big object within a couple of minutes. And you can do all of these things around permission sets and access controls that you would do when creating any standard or custom object in the exact same workflow, something that otherwise you would have to step out of Salesforce and use the API for. And to actually walk through an example of this process of creating a big object and populating it with data from outside of Salesforce, I want to hand this over now to our principal solution engineer and recently someone who filed a patent for a blockchain application on Heroku, something that we might need another webinar for soon, my dear friend Mike Salem. Mike, handing over to you.
Cool.
Sure, thanks, Ryan. Thanks for that shout out, by the way. All right, well, hello and welcome everybody that's dialed in today. Thanks for giving us your time to learn how you can work with massive data sets using big objects and doing it natively on Salesforce. So true to Salesforce fashion, when you're working with big objects, you can do it programmatically or you can do it declaratively. What I have up on my screen here is my Sublime text editor. And if you wanted to work through the metadata API and define and deploy your big objects that way, you could work through something very similar to what I'm showing on my screen here. So you could define your object, you could define your fields, define the indexes and the structure for them, as well as the permission sets on this tab. Finally, package it all up into an XML file, And then you could use, something like Workbench, however you might want to deploy your metadata, and define and deploy your big objects in a very programmatic way, what I'm sure most of you are very used to dealing with anyway. For this specific demo, we'd like to highlight the declarative approach that we've just recently built and have come out with on our App Exchange. So it's under Salesforce Labs. It's free for anybody to use. You can take it and kind of run with it from there. So we're going to walk through building an actual big object from scratch with you today on the phone. We'll load some data, and then we'll look at if we wanted to then view that big object data within the UI, for example, within a related list or something like that. How might we go about doing that as well? So I'm logged into my developer org. I have that App Exchange package installed, and this is the first thing that you would see when you go to start creating your big object. So the data set that I have has to do with bike rentals. If you think about things like, divvies or any of those, they have, like motorized scooters that just came out and all this kind of stuff. This is the data set that we're going to use. And so the use case here is that you're a company that does this. You have to manage your inventory, you have to manage your orders and your sales and keep track of who's renting what, where, when, and all that kind of stuff. So this is an example of data that would be largely immutable and would just explode over time as the business grows and you're keeping track of all these orders, geographic location, etc. So I'm just going to type in the name of my big object here on the screen. Like I showed you earlier, you could have done that in your code, but we can do it declaratively this way as well. And I'm just going to start adding the fields that I need to add. So you might think that this is pretty similar to creating a custom object, and that's the whole goal. To your end, whether you're working with a big data stack on our side or working with a custom object, the experience should be very, very similar. So I'll start to create some of my records. So the first thing I want to do is I want to create what the relationship is going to be between the big object and any other data within, core Salesforce on a standard or custom object. In this case, I'm going to relate my big object data, my rentals for these bikes, to various types of contacts so that when people who have rented these call in, we can immediately pull up the related big object data for their orders and understand exactly what they're talking about. And I'll just go ahead and set up some of these other fields here really quick. You can kind of follow along so you see what types of fields I'm creating, how I'm creating them, and all that. So I have 8 fields total. And the first one we're going to do is this lookup. And I'm just going to go ahead and call it contact lookup, reference to a contact, and the relationship name is also going to be contact lookup. I'm going to make this one indexed and required since this is going to be that primary key linking my order data to my contact data in Salesforce. We're going to have a trip ID with a length of 7, and this is also going to be indexed and required. So what you can start to do with this is if your contact calls in and you need to query through this data in different ways, you can set up these indexes so that you can search through the big object in a number of different ways. And Yari is actually going to cover that later in the broadcast. So if you think about the types of data that needs to be tracked when you do one of these bike rentals, we have things like start time, stop time. We have where they're renting it from, maybe an ID, something like that. Also a name, if we would just want to speak to it plainly. And also where they're going. So the ID for the to station, as we call it. So from a declarative point of view, it's pretty similar to creating a custom object. That's really all I had to do if you don't want to necessarily write all the code that you have to do to walk through this. And then the last step is just to assign the appropriate permissions for who should have access to this object, the fields, and the data. Again, just like you do with field level security and profiles when you're working with other types of objects in Salesforce. And the default here is that they're editable and readable, and I'm just going to leave the default alone. So my last step here is to deploy it. You can see up at the center here that we're deploying the big object as we speak. If I had gone through the metadata API, I would have deployed it that way. But we can see that the big object is here in our system under bike rental. The fields have been loaded through the deployment. And then the last thing I want to show you is if we were then to need to view this data within the related list, within the UI, right, if people are calling in, how might we do that as well? And so this is also something that's come with the App Exchange package. So when you download that App Exchange package, you get access to the Big Object Declarative Creator, and you also get access to a pre-built related list where you can just drag and drop these onto a page and view the data that way. So in this case, let's say Lauren Bailey up at the top left, let's say she's called in and she has a couple questions about some of the bike rentals that she's done in the past. Well, if you look at this related list right here on Lauren's contact record, this looks, very similar to any other type of related list that you might be viewing. The only difference is this is actually pulling from that big object that we just created together through the App Exchange component. And if you're wondering how some of this stuff kind of works, we can see when she started, when she stopped, what her trip IDs were, and some of those other fields that we created. I'll actually show you what's going on with this Lightning component. So we have some pre-built design attributes here on the right-hand side where you can link which big object you're relating to this person, what that primary key should be, we're using contact, and then what fields we want to display. So when you're working with these massive data sets and working with our big object technology, you can query the data using SOQL if you need it to be real time, or you can use Async SOQL, which is a new feature we've just come out with, which is our managed query service to be able to query across all of these massive data sets that customers are storing with Salesforce. So in this case, this is a SOQL query, displaying it within a Lightning component in Salesforce. And what I'd like to do now is I'd like to turn it over to our product manager, Yari, who's going to walk through Async SOQL and how we can do some of these additional queries on Salesforce. Yari?
So before jumping into Async SOQL and the using the big object, let me give you a quick summary on the type of use cases that we're currently working with related to big object. And on a high level, we have two types of big objects today. We have standard big objects. So these are big objects Salesforce has themselves defined. These are used by Salesforce products. Like, for instance, Salesforce Shield, Field Audit Trail creates a historical field history archive for archival field history data. And also within Shield, event monitoring, real-time events is using big object to retain log data and user behavior data in big object. Also, I don't know if you work with marketing, but there's also a Pardot engagement history that is also capturing user engagement into big object. And these standard big objects are then Salesforce products that are using big objects, but we also have custom big objects. So these are then the 1 million rows of data that Ryan mentioned that all of you have in your own orgs to try out the product. And now auditing and tracking and the ability to kind of understand uses of Salesforce, uses of the products that you provide, whether you are in retail, you're in digital technology markets, you have data that could be social data, behavior data, GPS data, any type of data about your customers, the machinery in manufacturing that you feel that could enrich overall the understanding and the complete view you have of your customer. Is some of those use cases that we're seeing a lot of our customers to bring the data into Salesforce, be it from elevators or machines or financial transactions or medical data and so forth. Then last but not least, the historical archive is also that while you've been maybe using Salesforce for a very long time, you might be also kind of a victim of your own success. You have accumulated over the years of time tens of millions of records or even maybe hundreds of millions. You want to scale to from B2B business to B2C, and there's just more things to track. So we have also quite a large number of customers that then offloading data from Salesforce core objects into the Salesforce big objects. So these are really kind of like the highlights of the use cases we have with customers today. Obviously, in Dreamforce, we have a couple of great presentations coming up, and we'll go a little bit deeper into the use cases. Is that so within Async SOQL, when to use it? So to the differences between standard SOQL and async SOQL are that within standard SOQL, you know that the number, the volume of the records is going to be small. When you know that the query is going to be running in tens of millions or hundreds of millions or billions of rows of data, then you should be using async SOQL. And also standard SOQL is great when you are building a UI component. You need to display a very small set of data, but like async SOQL is really built to always ensure that your query is not going to time out. You're querying against millions of records, and you want to ensure that the query always completes. So the way that async SOQL really works with big data is that you can do different kinds of aggregates or filtering in a way. So all the statistics around the query performance, all the pick script, the API that operates on Hadoop HBase infrastructure that the big object is running on, is really extracting and processing at the same time when you're kind of running these jobs at any time. So today, async SOQL is not enabled automatically with the product within that 1 million that every Salesforce org has. But when you buy big objects and you actually purchase the SKU, then async SOQL is automatically enabled. And also, if you have Salesforce Shield products, any field audit trail, event monitoring type of products that are using async SOQL as part of the data processing for standard objects, then async SOQL is automatically enabled. Really, the kind of like the core use cases of async SOQL is that you are extracting, filtering, aggregating a specific set of your massive data set into a manageable data set that you're just going to be working on. And for example, to run reports or dashboards or build any kind of query filtering, you would then extract aggregates using async SOQL from your big object to say that using the primary key fields, and you run specific jobs daily or weekly or whenever these jobs need to run into your target custom object, where you then have that working data set that you can run all the standard reports and dashboards and related lists and things that you can then build on top of. Additionally, we also offer a Einstein Analytics connector. So if you have Einstein Analytics licenses or you want to build certain data visualizations, then that's also a very wonderful option to visualize data on big objects. Last but not least, for Community Cloud, you might have a lot of people that need to access certain subsets of the data. They don't necessarily need to have access to the full data set, but working on big object and running async SOQL jobs to extract certain aggregates or filtered details from that big object data set into a separate component for, let's say, for Community Cloud is a very exciting and new emerging use case that we're seeing. So now next, let's take a look at that with Mike. How do we see this in action? And Mike, back to you.
Okay, so we had originally walked through how we might create a big object. Ryan spoke to how we get data in there using the bulk API or a MuleSoft or another third-party tool. And our big object exists within the system. We have data in there. We saw it in a related list, so that you can view it within the Salesforce UI doing real-time SOQL queries. But what if you want to then report on it? What if you want to combine big objects and reporting? And you already showed you how we can work with Einstein Analytics. But for this demo, we're going to look at how we can combine async SOQL into a working data set. So bringing some of that big object data into a custom object. And then how do we then open it up for all of the other types of platform features that we're used to using? So I'm going to start back here in Workbench. Most of you are probably familiar with Workbench, but you could really use anything that gives you access to your Async SOQL functionalities to be able to write these queries. And working with Async SOQL is not different from working with SOQL. It just so happens that on the back end, there's some different things that we take care of, like you already mentioned, that allows us to get past timeout limits and increase the number of return results and really give you access to query across all of your big object data without some of the limitations that you might be used to thinking about if you had run into using SOQL on custom objects for some of this stuff. So instead of typing all of it out, I have my SOQL query here that I just typed out. So you can see it's very similar. What I'm selecting from what object, the types of filters I want to put in place. Again, what I'm doing here is I'm just bringing in those big object fields that you had seen me create, and I'm going to bring in what I need just within the last year. So my filter here is saying of the entire data set that we have in our big object, all orders from all time that's going on with these bike rentals, just give me the current year. Because when it comes to standard reports and dashboards, ad hoc reporting, things that I just need to do quickly, I don't necessarily need to report on everything that I possibly have that we're storing in the big object. I only want to look at maybe the last year, the last 2 years, something like that. So in this example, we're going to pull in the last year's worth of data. And the way Async SOQL works is you choose which big object is going to be your target object. And then you say, where do I want to keep that Async SOQL data? So where do I want to keep the data that I'm pulling from the big object into my custom object? And in this case, we have a custom object called bike rental working. So you might have a paradigm where you have an archival big object or a full data set big object or something like that. And then you might have a working custom object, give you the benefit of those both worlds, your big data architecture and your ad hoc and your real-time transactional access as well. So I've defined that my target object is going to be my working data set, my custom object for my working data set. And now I go through a pretty similar mapping exercise. So I say from my big object, where do I want to pull that data and what am I giving it to in the custom object? So I'll just fill out a few more of these really quick. 2 station IDs, 2 station name. You remember when I created these earlier. And then I'll submit. And so what's going to happen is it's going to go through its job, as those resources become available in a very asynchronous way. And it's going to go through the data that I've asked it to pull from the big object and put it into the data that I need it to be in the custom object. This gives us that notion of a full data set and a working data set. So what that becomes is now I have that data in Salesforce that operates, or in core, in custom object Salesforce, just like anything else. That's just for my last year, and it operates just like I would expect it to operate for any other kind of data that I've been storing in Salesforce. You can see here, I have my working data set filtered by just the current year, and I'm just looking at a list view here. So a list view like you would see in any other way. And the cool thing about this is now I can take this data from our big data stack and then do things like build custom dashboards, build custom reports. You can see that this has been taken from the full data set and now is a working data set in Salesforce. And this is where I can start to begin finding trends, finding where those hotspots are, really getting the value of what I'm doing when I'm storing all of this massive data on Salesforce. So a couple things we can see here quickly. We can see the top routes that are going on. It looks like most people are riding their bikes in between Canal Street and Larrabee Street and Madison and Kingsbury. So if I'm a bike rental company, maybe I up the amount of stops that are there. Maybe I do, some other kinds of some benefits or some promos along that route. I can see the top rental locations, period, where people are taking the bikes from, where they're dropping the bikes off to. And then surprise, surprise, our top renter overall is Lauren Bailey. Now, if you've seen standard reports and dashboards, these are the kinds of things that you can do extremely quickly. But the cool thing about this is now that these are the kinds of things we can also do while leveraging, billions of records, things that we weren't used to thinking about being possible natively on Salesforce. And that's what's so cool about this is that, as our customers grow, as the infrastructure grows and the types of storage and reporting needs that they have grows, we're growing alongside them. And so we're giving our customers and our developers those options to work with big data, work with working data, also programmatically and declaratively across all the different types of use cases and ways they might need to work with this. So what we just looked at was after creating the big object, how do we query across all of it? How do we use Async SOQL to create a working data set, which then unlocks it for everything else that we might need to do with it in Salesforce, such as like you're seeing here, creating an ad hoc dashboard.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Mike, so much for the two amazing demos and Yari on the use cases. I want to kind of just finish off here with sort of our take on some of the why behind big objects, which is this, that we wanted to take some of the typical big data requirements that our customers run into and that you as a developer community run into, which include creating and maintaining a third-party solution on third-party infrastructure, having to go through separate MSAs and SecOp reviews, having to then create your own MapReduce jobs to perform operations against this data at scale. Really, there's just so much in the way between the application, the experience that you wanted to create, and the work that you had to do to create it, that we felt like we could leverage our infrastructure, which was ready for big data, to actually provide this type of experience directly on Salesforce. So we think that big objects allows you to go and create these types of high throughput applications that have many records of immutable data behind them in a way that is easier and simpler than having to go and integrate a third-party stack into your application. And what I want to talk about really now also is, where do we go from here? So if you're now feeling like this is something that's interesting and you want to learn more, there's actually a couple of great ways for you to get started in terms of not just learning more about big objects, but actually utilizing them. And again, I'll highlight that everyone who has a Salesforce org has 1 million records of big object storage ready to go. So if you want to start by taking that component that I showed you and that Mike showed you and actually start creating your first couple of big objects, by all means, try it out and see what you can do with it. But if you want to learn a little bit more first too, I would recommend you try out our Trailhead module on big objects to learn the basics, not just of how to structure and create a big object or what some of these use cases are, but also how to use Async SOQL to create operations against that big object data. Then, of course, use this link to go to the App Exchange and get the custom big object creator, which is the component that Mike and his team built to make big objects creation a simple and declarative process. And then, of course, check out our developer documentation, which includes a guide for getting started with big objects, as well as a Salesforce DX plugin for using Salesforce DX to actually manipulate and query big objects and create them and populate them too for all our DX devs. And then lastly here, we're going to be at Dreamforce. So if you're going to be joining us, and I hope many of you are, please come and visit us at Dreamforce. We're going to have 2 dedicated sessions for big objects. One will be a platform breakout. It'll be about 40 minutes, and we'll go into more of the why and some business use cases for why big objects really was spearheaded at Salesforce and what we've done with it internally and what our customers have done with it as well. And then also visit our developer theater, of course, to get a deep dive look from our engineers, the people that work with Yari to build this technology and to build Async SOQL. They'll walk you through what's on the roadmap. They'll also walk you through their tips and tricks for using big objects at scale. So we're very excited to see you at Dreamforce.
Great, thank you. So let's just leave that slide there. There's a lot going on that slide, so we'll let people read it. We have so many questions coming in from the audience. Thank you so much for sending us your questions. So I want to reserve a little bit more time than usual to just tackle all of these. So let's just start from the top and start firing off questions. Is everyone ready? Yari and Mike, you ready to start fielding some questions too? And we'll get, great, good to hear everyone's on the line. So the first question I've got here, it looks like it's for Yari. Are there any limits to big objects?
Right, so we have the limit of 100 big objects per org today. So this means that you can have 100 different big objects. If you actually create the big object, you have the 1 million available out of the box. Every org has this. But when you buy big objects, you're going to get you buy it in the increments of 50 million per org per the SKU. You can distribute this across many big objects as you like. So you can create 10 big objects and then split the data through the 50 million across these objects. Additionally, since these are horizontally scalable, there's no really size limit per se for big objects. So you can actually store, tens of millions or hundreds of millions or even billions of data in those objects.
Sounds like you just answered 2 questions in one, because the next question I was going to ask you was, is there a size limit for big objects? So thanks for answering that one. So the next question I've got here is for, it's also for Yari. It's, are big objects only available on Lightning, or are they also available in Classic?
They work both. It's, technology is very generic, so they'll work nicely with both. I think the list view component that was shown is a Lightning specific component, right, Mike? Can you confirm?
Yeah, it's a Lightning specific component, but the way that we built it, you could do using Visualforce or related list that way if you wanted to also.
Great. Thank you both for answering that. So the next question, I think I'll just open it up to all three of you, whoever wants to answer this one first. What is the data storage limitation in big objects? Are there any storage costs?
Why don't you take that, Ryan?
I'll go ahead and take that. So again, 1 million records is included, and we operate in a record-based mindset, not a gigabyte or terabyte-based mindset, because ultimately, as Yari mentioned, this is an infinitely horizontally scalable solution with Hadoop as its backend and HBase as its layer for database interactions. So ultimately, there's no restriction in terms of how much data you can bring in, but there's a cost associated when you get past 1 million records. You would then purchase a pack for 50 million additional records, and you can keep purchasing those incremental packs of 50 million records to provide the capacity that you need for the services that you're trying to create. And those packs are $12,000 per year, which ends up being very cost-effective relative to integrating and creating a separate big data solution.
Great, thank you for that, Ryan. The next question I have is for you as well. As an enterprise best practice, do you recommend storing legacy data on Salesforce or use Salesforce Connect to fetch data on the fly from an on-prem system?
It's a good question, and it comes down to the use case that you have in mind. And if what you want to do is access, let's say, sensitive, compliant data for a business process, and you need to make create, read, update operations against that data routinely, I'd recommend Salesforce Connect. But if you want to have the data imported into Salesforce, managed natively in Salesforce, and used for many different types of batch-like operations, then I'd recommend bringing that data in and keeping it within a big object, then using Async SOQL to bring it into the fold whenever you need it.
Great, thank you, Ryan. So Mike, the next question here is for you. Is the AppExchange package recommended?
Similar to how Ryan started his first answer, I'd say it depends. I mean, one of the things that we pride ourselves on at Salesforce is the idea that there's room for everybody in terms of how they want to create their applications. So if you're somebody who loves tackling things in a very programmatic way, and you want to be in a text editor and you want to be writing code, then the AppExchange package is not going to be for you because we've abstracted all of that away. But if you're somebody who wants to get up and running extremely quickly, if you want to define and deploy a big object within a few seconds, like I just showed you, and just kind of go from there, and maybe you do or maybe you don't know how to code, but you're just looking to move a little bit quicker, then the AppExchange package is a great way to get in there, figure out what big objects can do, how you set them up, what's required, and it's just a really easy way to get started that way.
Great, thank you, Mike. The next question here is interesting. It's in regards to Einstein Analytics. Is big objects supported by Einstein Analytics so that data set and dashboards can be created?
Yeah, I can take that one. I can take a first stab at it.
Great.
So you saw that we showed big object data as a related list. You saw that we used Async SOQL to bring it into a custom object and then use standard reports and dashboards in an ad hoc way on it. We also have a connector to go straight from big objects to Einstein Analytics. And we're seeing just a lot of momentum with this now that we've released this product because it solves both pieces of the puzzle. When we think big data, so much of the messaging can either be on the analytics side of it or it can be on the storage side of it. And based on who you're talking to, they might have their own version of what they mean when they say big data. And so using big objects in combination with Einstein Analytics solves both of those pieces of the puzzle. And we can do that very well.
Great, thank you, Mike. On a related question, can we do reporting on big objects?
Yeah, in both of the ways that we've seen on the demo so far and also talked about. So whether or not you need to do ad hoc reporting using standard reports and dashboards, or if you want to do a little bit more comprehensive, trend analysis and enterprise level reporting with Einstein Analytics, either way.
Great. So with that in mind, is there any reason to still use standard objects? Are there limitations to big objects that are not found in standard objects?
So when it comes down to big object versus a custom object or a standard object, really the biggest thing that I would say think about and keep in mind is what's the day-to-day use of the data. So if you have, let's talk about it in the context of maybe a call center agent or maybe even a salesperson. If you're somebody who's doing manual data entry day in and day out directly into Salesforce, and you're going to be doing that, for the data as long as you're going to be working with the app, and you need that real-time read, write, edit, delete. You need automation when it happens. So if I create a record and I save it and I need that record to turn around and fire off a workflow or send an email or have some sort of trigger execute, that type of manual data entry, real time, coupled with automation, is best served for standard and custom objects. While we deliver big data at scale natively on Salesforce, there's just some technological trade-offs that occur when you're dealing with the ability to handle billions of records at a time versus a more traditional relational database, which is what our custom objects are. So on the big objects end, if you're thinking about data at scale, maybe it's read-only on a related list and call center agent just needs to look it up, or instead of having another screen to swivel chair and log into, for example. Or maybe you are coupling it with Einstein Analytics and you're running kind of a weekly or a monthly trending report. And it's a large amount of data. You're okay with batch operations, and it's not necessarily being used in that day in and day out, very real-time manual transaction process. Then big objects is the way to go for that.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mike. The next question here is, can we call big objects from platform events?
So why don't I take that one? So let me give you the forward-looking statement here. So this is something that we have on the roadmap. Obviously, today, the best practice is that you can use API, bulk API. You can insert data from S object or externally to the big object. You can create batch Apex to create different type of inserts in the big object. As we see the event-driven architecture expand in the enterprise, we definitely want to automatically make that integration available. This is something that we don't offer out of the box today, but we are working on in the roadmap.
Great, thank you, Yari. The next question I've got here, maybe you can answer this one as well. How many indexes are allowed per object?
Yeah, there's one primary key index supported.
Okay, that was quick. Does big objects support all field types?
There's some limitations to the field types. For instance, big objects, they support a numerical Boolean type of field, so you can't store files or attachments in big objects. I would refer to the big object implementation guide to the details and all the caveats.
Great. So the big objects implementation guide, can you remind people where they can find that?
Yeah. Make sure that you actually follow these links over here too, and you can actually begin to interact with that information. And it has a lot of what you already mentioned.
Great. Thank you for that. So the next question here is involving Heroku. So do you have any reference or comparison using Heroku and big objects for exporting data? What is the case scenario that fits for each one? And do you have any price range references? So it's always about the cost, right?
Sure. So Mike, I think maybe you can take part of that and I'll take maybe the back half.
Yeah, so when dealing with, Heroku or big objects or really any type of third-party data store, based on the technology behind them, there's going to be use cases that fit for each. It's never going to be an all or nothing kind of thing. For customers that are already using Heroku, that are familiar with Postgres, that need a larger amount of data storage, and who also need some transactional capability on that data storage going through Postgres, then Postgres can be a perfectly good fit for what they're trying to do. Where we see big objects really, really exceeding is the fact that it is natively built into the Lightning platform means that there is zero need for any integrations. There's zero need for any connectors or add-on SKUs or anything. So if we have customers that are happy on platform, want to stay on platform, if we're in a compliant type of environment, and they want to reduce the compliant boundary that they have, right? Not needing to certify many different solutions that have been integrated together. and also just know kind of Apex and SOQL and are good at it and want to stay within that framework, then Big Objects is extremely fast and extremely easy to use. So there's never going to be a be-all, end-all. Different types of things can work for different scenarios. But some of the things that I just mentioned about, staying on platform, no integrations necessary, using the tools that you already love for big data, that's where Big Objects really start to excel. And we see it a lot with the lack of integrations. Once customers get their hands on, they build a big object, they write an async SOQL query, all within the span of 5 minutes, so they're not having to manage REST calls or any type of middleware. The amount of overhead and time that is needed to manage all this kind of stuff, especially in terms of what used to be needed, is just dramatically reduced, and it's pretty cool to see.
Okay, great, thank you. And you want to talk about the pricing?
And I'll just say price-wise, there isn't really a magic number. It's going to come down to where your priorities are for the project that you're working on. And if you're looking to build out a custom application in Heroku, and you need to leverage it in Postgres, there's probably going to be some advantages there because of the project that you're working on. Cost-wise, Big Objects is going to be competitive versus pretty much every third-party data store, including Heroku. So again, it comes down to where your skills are. And if you are a developer with Force or Lightning Platform experience, this is obviously something that's compelling from a price and a usage standpoint.
Great, thank you for that, Ryan. So I'm going to say we only have a few more minutes left in this webinar. I'm super happy with the number of questions we've got going on. And I'm sure Ryan and Yadi and Mike here would love to get to them all. So after this webinar is over, we'll think about how to address everybody's questions. It could be something like a blog post, or we can tackle a lot of these maybe on our Salesforce developer Twitter handle, or on the Trailblazer community for developers. So we'll keep you posted, and I don't want to leave anybody hanging who spent the time with us so far. So that's just a quick note. We'll hope to get to your questions. With that in mind, I'll jump right back in, and we'll be asking questions for about 5 more minutes before we close out. So the next question I've got here is, are the async SOQL only for big objects, or can it be used for standard or custom objects? I think we talked somewhat about this, but if we could expand more on this question, it would be really great.
So async SOQL works out of the box when you have big objects queue enabled. However, you can also do for the core objects what is called the
Yari, you dropped out again. Mike or Ryan, you want to jump on that?
Yeah, sure. This is a question we get once in a while. Can you run async SOQL queries against custom and standard objects as well? It's something that we can enable from our side. Right now, we're working on ways to better improve how the async SOQL query process is expanded across all of your different objects. So it's not something that we have implemented natively. However, if you begin to work with big objects and you'd like to expand the range of your async SOQL queries and how effective they are, that's something that our account team can put our product team in touch with. They can in touch with you, and we can improve that for you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ryan. So the next question here is about bulk API. I think this is something that a lot of developers have been interested in before. So the question is, can data be inserted into big objects using bulk API 2.0?
Yes.
highly.
Okay. Let's go through all the rest of the questions at that speed, and I think we'll be fine. So the next question we have is, how are big objects architecturally different in their implementation than regular custom objects?
I'll go ahead and take that. They're not built on our, for those that know, it's not built on our Oracle multi-tenant backend. It has a separate backend that's Hadoop with HBase on top of it. So it's completely different and horizontally scalable. Okay,
great. Thank you for that. Next question is,
actually, Arabelle, I'd like to add something to that. If there's anybody who has dove deep into big data architecture, async SOQL, I feel like the way that our engineering team built that is kind of a sleeper feature until you really realize what's going on behind the scenes. So Hadoop and HBase are NoSQL, so you don't query through them in the same way that we might think when we're using SOQL in our traditional relational database and doing things that way. But what they've been able to do is they've been able to provide this, NoSQL managed query service that's available through Apex. So we're taking two things that in the past, you either kind of had to choose one or the other, and we've delivered it to people who already know Apex to be able to take advantage of big data, to be able to query across all of it without having to also know a different language or a different type of stack, really just allowing them to use the Apex and the SOQL information that they already know.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Mike. Next question here is, does Big Object support field encryption in case I want to mask some critical information?
Brian, you already want to take that one?
Yeah, I'll leave that to you.
Yeah, so we are, like Mike mentioned, so we and Ryan clarified, we are talking about a separate, physically separate infrastructure. So today, field encryption is not supported in Big Object.
Yeah, I'm sorry, could you clarify? I didn't quite catch that. Is or is not?
Is not. So
okay.
So if you're using platform encryption in encrypting your native objects, and you would like that to be encrypted with the same key in Big Object, there's no interoperability today.
Okay, great, thank you. So the next question here, maybe you can answer this one as well. Can this be used for data warehousing? For example, moving data from custom objects into big data for storing old records?
Yeah, would be recommended. Yeah, that's a great use case.
Oh, great, perfect. So I think we have time for one or two more questions. So let me find some really interesting ones here. What's the best way to insert lots of records in big objects without hitting any limits?
So bulk API is probably the preferred method. Obviously, like if you want to do a initial insertion that you have a lot of data, I would recommend bulk API. And you can also be in touch with your Salesforce account team if you have a very, very large data set and you need some help with the initial ingestion related to the daily limits. We can then work with you related to the initial insertion to free up some of those limits in order to get the data inserted in a shorter period of time.
Okay, great, thank you. I have a curveball question for the final question as we roll into Dreamforce. I see here that you're both giving these talks, the platform breakout and then the developer theater session. Aside from your own sessions, which sessions are you most looking forward to at Dreamforce?
Maybe we'll go around the table.
We can go around the table. Brian, you want to take off?
Yeah, I'll say if you're going to Dreamforce, if you're interested in platform events, as I know so many developers are, please come and check out our session from John Brock on how to connect platform events to downstream systems with MuleSoft. There's amazing things that we're doing with MuleSoft to extend platform events. You've got to check it out if you have a platform events use case.
Yeah, a lot of folks are interested in MuleSoft, and there's going to be a lot of muleys walking around. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yep, looking forward to that one. How about Yadi, Mike? What are you excited about?
Yadi, you want to go next?
Yeah, so I'm really excited about. We have some really good lineup with Salesforce Shield, the security products. We have Asaf and Amanda talking about like how to monitor Salesforce adoption and utilization through event monitoring. And then we have a number of big banks and customers all the way from New Zealand presenting how they've deployed Salesforce Shield. So I'm really excited about those ones.
Great. Thanks, Yadi. Mike, what about you?
Yeah, thanks, Arabella. So in addition to the big objects sessions that you're seeing here, I'll be giving a few talks on Einstein vision and language. So if you're interested in working with computer vision models, natural language processing models, how do we do that kind of AI on Salesforce? Definitely come to those talks where you'll see me and some of the other folks on my team and the PMs be talking about that. I'm also really excited about the work we're doing in the blockchain space. So we've partnered with Heroku, and some colleagues of mine on my team are piloting Heroku working with blockchain applications, Ethereum private applications, if you're in the blockchain space at all. And how do we use that in context of the customers that you might have and the data that you need to bring into Salesforce? And what does that even look like in the enterprise space? So those are the things that, in addition to the big data stuff that we've gone over, what I'm super excited about. And I'd hope that, you'd be able to come and join those if you can.
Oh, lovely. Thank you all for answering that. I'm going to share what I'm most excited about, and it's the developer keynote session. So it'll be in Moscone West on the 3rd floor, and it's going to be at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So right after we have a few good talks, please show up there. We'll be talking a lot about how you can build apps faster on the Lightning platform. You can integrate them more easily with certain companies like MuleSoft, and how we can make them smarter with Einstein and Einstein Analytics. So tune in. If you can't join in person at Dreamforce, then you can definitely join online and watch it live. Thanks again for your Q&A. And as we close out, don't forget to answer our survey and tell us if you liked it. If you want to have more of a certain aspect of these webinars in the future, let me know, and we'll make it happen for you. So once again, thank you all for taking the time to join us today, and we'll see you soon.